What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another brand new episode of Balisong Review. My name is Banzo. I am a reviewer, enthusiast, and Balisong flipper on YouTube. And today we're reviewing not just one Toshin, but two Toshins. It's the Toshin Overload. So let's go ahead and get effing overloaded with the Toshins. So today's video is going to be about the V1 Toshin and the V2 Toshin in kind of like a comparison video, but also dual review as well. And I want to start off by saying that this video is going to be a pass around video. These two are knives that were passed to me via a friend on Instagram. After seeing these two on a live stream being flipped, I just had to get my hands on these. And shout out to the homie for letting me try these out for a few days and letting me give my thoughts and opinions on these. So let's start off with the V1. And I want to say this is definitely the more serious, actual consistent flipper of the two. However, there are some things I want to say on my own personal opinion about the V2 when we get to it. But for now, this is a really cool knife and I want to talk about it. So this has a very Japanese katana inspired blade that has really refined kind of looks to it. It has a nice weight reducing fuller on the blade, and the spine is completely crowned from the tip all the way to the Zen cups. Because of its press fit Zen pins, this is a lot more tactile and responsive feeling than the V2, which is using screwed in Zen pins. There is actually a physical difference when you flip these two knives back to back, because both these knives are very different from each other. This has more of a refined polished feel, while the V2 has definitely more of a raw style feel. It doesn't feel as nearly complete as the V1. The V2 has channel constructed titanium handles that are fitted via some polished pivots and a really nice bushing system that is turning this thing into a very smooth and really great sounding flipper. Let's actually hear it right now. The channels of the handles itself have a speed channel on the outside of it with some jimping that runs all the way from the Zen pin area all the way down to the bottom, where there's actually more jimping for assistance with ladders and stuff. I find that these jimping marks on this knife itself are actually really well skinned over for hot spots. There really isn't any on this knife whatsoever. It has that nice level of finishment and polish that knives on their last stage of production usually do. And I have to say, the quality of this knife feels really good. This knife is going to be fairly limited as far as how many of these are going to be made. It's not likely that these are going to be heavily produced, which means that it could possibly be one of the rarest knives I have on this channel, but currently there is no number or anything surrounding this knife. It's just the name, the specs, and how it flips. I've only seen one other person flip these two knives beside myself, so keep that in mind. You know, keep these knives with a grain of salt. They're not going to be super accessible, but that doesn't mean I still can't cover these knives for you, so let's continue doing so. Overall, I feel like this knife has definitely a inspired look. A lot of people have been comparing this to the Konohishi, but yeah, you can definitely see where the look came from, or was at least, you know, in some way kind of inspired by the Konohishi. Not that that's a bad thing. I thought the Konohishi always looked really good and has a really good look to it, and in this kind of, you know, raw, non-anodized spec, it looks really good. And yeah, that's all I can really say spec wise about it. The other thing is that it weighs around 4.3 ounces, so it is on the heavier side for knives nowadays. But yeah, let's go ahead and move in to the V2, which in my opinion is absolutely awesome looking. Just look at this crazy looking blade. It looks absolutely sick. I mean, the blade is super curved. It pretty much is the same exact blade as the V1, except with a dramatic change in curvature. This also has new handles with a slightly more original design, but still has that, you know, nice Japanese inspired element to it. It also has much thicker handles, which give it a much better grip and feel for handling when flipping this knife, in my opinion, over the V1. The handles do kind of lack that last minute kind of polish or feel to them. They don't feel super refined like the V1s do, and it kind of does kind of cost a little bit of points in my opinion. You can really feel the jimping when flipping this thing. It's very much there. I can get over that because I've been flipping for a few years and I felt a lot worse honestly when flipping. So yeah, it's not a super huge difference. There's just a lot of things on here, hot spots, that could be like, you know, refined, sanded, and, you know, chamfered a little bit to address those. So yeah, it's not a huge deal, but something to note for sure. Another thing to know about this is because of the blade and its curvature, the handles do kind of sit weird when in the closed position. To people with very big ideals visually on symmetry and stuff like that, that might be a big thing with you. But for me, it's just something I've noticed. It's just really just to adjust and compensate for this extremely curved blade, which by the way is very sharp, and also has another fuller just like the V1 to reduce weight. But in my opinion, this knife doesn't really need to reduce weight because it already is lighter than the V1 at around 4 to 4.2 ounces. The V1 and the V2 flip vastly differently, and that's why I want to talk about both of them after the flipping segment. But another big change to this one is the widened channels. On the speed channel on the outside, it is dramatically bigger, and on the inside channel to house the blade itself, it is also precariously large, especially if you look right here. This comes to a point where it might be too large because it almost is starting to be, along with the chamfered corner, which is much more exaggerated on the V2's handles, it kind of comes to a precarious point where it might be very thin, almost so thin that it could create its own edge, and like it's a little rough feeling, especially if you're doing ladders. It's just another hot spot that needs kind of addressed. So yeah, besides that though, everything else about this feels good. I mean, I like the new design. I think it's not as good and as classy as the V1 looks, but it's more original and more identifying to a Toshin than just kind of like a Toshin that looks like a Konohishi. One thing I will say, again, going on with the differences with this knife, is the Zen pins. These are screwed in Zen pins compared to the V1's press fit Zen pins, and they do tactily give a much different response. This one feels a lot more mushy than the V1 does. The V1 feels a lot better and more responsive, so I kind of wish the V2 had the press fit Zen pins that the V1 has, but it's all right. I mean, screwed in Zen pins are okay. It's just not as snappy feeling. It doesn't feel nearly as refined as the V1, if I'm gonna be honest. And same goes with the bushing system. The bushing system feels like there was a lot more time spent on the V1 than it does the V2. The V2 also kind of plays into that with its sound. The V2 doesn't nearly sound as good as the V1, as I will demonstrate now. The V2 just is not as snappy and is not as glassy or ringy as the V1, and in my opinion, that does kind of give it a little bit less points in my opinion. I do like my knife to sound good as well, but flipping does add a huge element to this. And I will say, these knives flip vastly different from each other, almost to the point where they're basically completely separate knives. But let's go ahead and get into the flipping portion of this video so we can tell which one is actually better than the other. All right, so now let's talk about both of these in kind of a comparison after a little bit of a flipping session with them. In my opinion, the V1 feels a lot more consistent than the V2. It just seems easier to quickly and refinedly just put out tricks that you already know. It just does them with ease, really. The only drawbacks I do have with this are the thinness of the handles and kind of its level of refinement, because it does feel a little slippery sometimes, and sometimes you can feel like that the jimping is just not even there at all because of how well polished and sanded down these are, which I know it sounds like enough is never enough to me, but you know, listen, sometimes I can barely feel the jimping is there. So sometimes maybe a less refinement is better, because with the V2, I feel like the sort of raw finish gives it a more advantage, honestly, with flipping it. Even though it doesn't have the same level of polish as the V1, this one feels special because of how visually cool this one is. I know there's a lot of really cool visual knives out there, but some of them don't satisfy me when flipping them. This knife is just satisfying and really fun to watch while flipping, and in my opinion, that kind of negates some of its cons, some of its downfalls, like the kind of unrefined handles, the hot spots in the handles. And it kind of makes me think as, hey, maybe these are good things. Like, for one, I can feel the jimping, I can feel the grip since the handles are more raw. And even though this doesn't have a crazy cool or awesome sound profile like the V1 does, it kind of like helps me focus on the flipping aspect of the knife a little bit more than the V1. And while it does kind of have mushier Zen pins than the V1, it's not a huge difference, and I kind of just ignore it, to be honest. In my opinion, the downfalls of the V2 are kind of just things that could be improved. I think the tolerances could be a little bit better. I think, you know, maybe they could use a bit more sandpaper on the handles and make it a little bit nicer. I mean, the fascias of the handle itself are nice, but the sides definitely need touched up, and the inside channels for sure need touched up because they are still kind of sharp. The Zen pins as well is also something I think could be improved on, just to make it a little bit more tactile, a little bit more glassy, and overall just bring this to a bow of a present that this knife actually is. I really like this knife in terms of flipping. I feel like, in my opinion, if I had to choose either one to keep for flipping purposes only, I would choose the V2 over the V1, because I've had a lot of great knives and this one is just great. This is great but fun. This is like, it adds an element of fun that the V1 does not have. It's like, it knows the V1 is trying to be serious, but this one is just all about how fun it can be while flipping it. And in my opinion, that kind of makes this seem like a Porsche, while this is a Ferrari. It really is just like, you can really just, it's just fun. It really is just like fun. Like, you can have a serious handling car like a Porsche, but what's fun is a slippy, slidey BMW. Like, that's just like how it is. Like, this is what I'm feeling as far as how this thing flips. It just feels a lot more fun and inviting to flip. This one is more addictive to flip than the V1, in my opinion, and I'm honestly going to give it a higher score because of that. This knife is consistent, smooth, high quality, and great, but this is some of that with a lot more fun. And because of that, I think I'm gonna have to give this a 9.5, and the V1 an 8. I like the V2 a lot more, not just visually, but also how it feels as well. These two feel completely different in terms of how they flip. This knife on its own, I actually really want. Like this, if I had to buy this out right now and I had the money to do so, I would in a heartbeat, because this knife is very special to me. It visually is insane looking and very fun to flip, and is honestly very Grail-like. This is Grail-like to me. This gets to 9.5. So anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. If you guys enjoyed, press the like button, hit the subscribe button, and also stay tuned for a not one, not two, but a triple review on some knives coming soon. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.